As part of the 250th anniversary of our nation, the Berwick Historical Society is hosting the House Tours of Berwick. There's going to be 7 homes and 2 churches on this great tour, and we're going to give you a sneak peek of one of those houses. Let's head inside. Dina, this home is absolutely beautiful. Everyone's going to love it. Let's start with where we are right now.
Okay, so we're in the drawing room. This would have been a beautiful room where the current owner has hung portraits on the wall. Women would sit in front of fire screens to protect their delicate makeup. And there's so many 18th century artifacts here that are just beautiful and colonial and not replicas.
Dina, let's start right with what's behind us.
Okay, so around the fireplace are beautiful Delft tiles, and these tiles actually belong to the Mrs. Astor of New York High Society.
Wow.
She had a home in Newport, Rhode Island called Beechwood, and these tiles were up until a couple years ago in Beechwood, and now they're here in Berwick. Above the tiles is more Delft blue tiles, and there is a beautiful liquor case that's pretty significant to the history of our country. That liquor case belonged to the grandson of William Penn.
Wow.
His name was John Penn. He was a signer of the Declaration of Independence and the Articles of Confederation. He was the last Pennsylvania royally appointed governor.
That's amazing.
So it's pretty significant and important that we have that there.
It sure is.
So behind you, Jackie, we have 2 portraits by Peter Paul Lenz. This is Andrew Hackett, Esquire, and his sister, Mrs. Blofield. They hung in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts for decades. And eventually became deaccessioned and found their way to Berwick.
Now there's a painting on the other side of the grandfather clock here. That's a special painting.
So her name was Louisa Greneau, and she had a very interesting life, but even more interesting than her is the painter who actually painted this. This is an original Gilbert Stuart. We all know Gilbert Stuart because if you pick up a dollar bill, he is the man who painted the portrait of George Washington on the dollar bill. He painted him 3 different ways, but the most famous Gilbert Stuart of George Washington, besides the dollar bill, was the full-length Langhorne that was in the East Room of the White House. So this is a highboy from the Packwood House Museum in Lewisburg. It's a great example of Chippendale, Pennsylvania-made furniture.
It's a beautiful piece. There's so many lovely details and carvings on it, so it really is special.
These are the Bellarmine books. Robert Bellarmine was a Jesuit. He was busy formulating an argument against every Protestant attack on the Catholic faith.
Yes, that was a huge turning point with the Protestant Reformation.
Yeah.
And he defended the faith.
He defended the Catholic faith. He was so good at it that Protestant universities across Europe actually trained scholars on how to just debate him.
Yeah, it's amazing. And he became a saint.
He became a saint in the 1930s, and September 17th is his saint day. These books are first editions. They were published in 1589, and they're over 400 years old.
Well, now we're in the elegant dining room, and let's talk about the table.
Okay, so here on the table is a soup service made up of Canton china. Now, Canton china was a beloved kind of china that George Washington had at his home in Mount Vernon.
Yes.
Thomas Jefferson loved Canton china. John Adams loved Canton. So it was a very early America pattern and service that everyone loved. In the middle of the table are some jellies, and your status in society would be reflected in how fancy your desserts were.
Nice.
And these desserts, these jellies, were made by boiling down deer antler or calf's hoof to extract the collagen.
Wow.
And they would be colored by natural things like the cochineal beetle.
Wow, it sounds really delectable, but it's not your average Jell-O. Let's just put it that way.
No. And the table on the other side of the room holds 6 bowls from the legendary Nanking cargo. They were on the ocean floor for over 200 years.
Wow. And then they were excavated in the 1980s, right? Let's talk about the wallpaper, because that reflects the period as well.
It does. In the early 1800s, this exact pattern was covering a Bible as a protective cover, and someone found it. And a little snippet, a little piece of this wallpaper was able to be sent off and reproduced.
Beautiful. Now we're in a tiny little room off the side of the kitchen, right? And it's called?
It's called the Snuggery.
I love it. And let's talk about some of the pieces in here.
So in the center of the table is a first edition copy of Thomas Paine's famous book, Common Sense. This is the book that sparked the American Revolution.
Very, very, very famous book.
Very. So on the wall here is an inaugurational button with the 13 colonies on the button. The button is a 1789 inaugurational button of George Washington's first campaign to be president. So in the corner of the Snuggery is a etching of George Washington, another Gilbert Stuart etching, and directly below that is the actual signature of King George III.
Wow.
And those two pieces it's kind of fun that they're so close together because those two men didn't like each other very much.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
We're going to learn about a proper tea.
Yeah, during the 18th century, tea was shipped from China in boxes a lot like this. And then women in homes a lot like this would have a tea caddy, and it would be lockable. Sometimes they were lead lined, but you definitely didn't want your household staff getting in there and taking your tea because it was expensive.
Yes.
So now I'm gonna scoop some tea for us to have.
Of course, it's loose leaf tea. There were no tea bags.
There were no tea bags.
Right.
So now I'm gonna fill it up with water and I'll meet you at the table.
Okay.
This is how 18th century women would sit and have tea with their friends. It's a little different than how we do it today. And this tea is piping hot. So instead of picking up our teacups with our handles, which we don't have, we pick up our handleless cups and we pour a tiny little bit of piping hot tea into our tea bowls.
Okay.
And we sip from the tea bowl.
This is so strange.
I know, it is.
Delicious. And that's how we have tea.
And that's how we have tea in the 18th century.
Dina, thank you so much. We had so much fun here today.
Oh, thanks for coming out, Jackie. The tour is going to be great.
Absolutely. And we have another house we're going to visit, and this house is a brand new build, right? Well, we can't wait to head over. Thanks again.
Thank you.